this video, I'll show you how we installed these walls for our bathroom in our 1949 Spartan Manor camper trailer. So you'll see how we made templates and fit each of these 4 panels, and we'll show you the 6 techniques we use to secure these panels in place. This was a lot of work, particularly for that curved panel back there, and my mom and I spent a total of nearly 40 hours installing these panels. And it's quite exciting for us to be at this stage in the project now, because for the past 2 years, the trailer looked a lot more like this. So if you're tackling something like this, I hope this video is helpful. Let's get started. So if you want to use a bubble level at all while you're doing this part of the project,
not quite yet,
I recommend you try and level the floor of the trailer before you get started.
All right, and that's looking very level.
Before we start working with the plywood, we're making a template out of corrugated cardboard. And to make it fit the curve of the ceiling nicely, I'm just making a series of approximations and getting it closer and closer with each iteration. And this whole time, I'm holding the right side of the cardboard, which is nice and straight, flush with the wall. And now this curve pretty much matches the shell of the trailer, but I don't want the plywood touching that, so I trace a line about 1/2 inch from the shell and cut that bit of the cardboard off. This piece of cardboard that we've used to make a good template for the top of the wall doesn't actually reach the floor of the trailer, so now we're taking a second piece of cardboard and have it rest on the floor. Then we draw a line across the top of it on the first piece of cardboard and a couple marks so we can figure out exactly how these line up. Back in the basement, it's a simple matter of lining up the templates with the plywood and with each other. Then I traced them with a pen and used a jigsaw to cut out the curve and the notch. So if we want to play it safe, we should cut it bigger than we think. So we cut this 1/4 inch longer than the template suggested. Back in the trailer, I moved the wall into position for its first test fit.
So obviously it has a ways to go before it's straight up and down. It's fitting up there just fine. Not sure why I made it so big here. So let's go cut off a bit more.
Like in any woodworking, it's always best to approach these final cuts slowly.
I have a squatter. Okay, it's really close now. I just moved that paper.
And with a bit of gentle convincing,
that's looking pretty darn good to me.
For the next segment of wall, which is curved, I made a separate video about how to bend plywood, because it was quite a process. You can see a link to that up in the corner. So now we'll show you how we fit that curved piece of plywood into the trailer. To start fitting this, we made a small section of the curved wall using our test curve and held it in position to mark where it intersects with the frames of the shell. Using a handsaw and then a jigsaw, we cut out the notch and then saw how it fit. And like this, it wasn't lining up well with that first segment of wall, so we cut the notch bigger. Then on our wall segment, we traced out the final height and transferred the lines from our template, which we took apart at this point.
I need to cut all this out.
And then you may be able to imagine that at this point, it was a little nerve-wracking to take a jigsaw to the segment of wall that took so long to make, but nonetheless, we cut it shorter, then cut the notch, but not to its full depth. A quick test fit confirmed that we needed to cut the notch deeper, so we did that, tested again, cut a bit more off, and then it finally fit.
Whoa, look at that.
And it's hard to actually convey how satisfying this result was. From a line of tape that we put down on the floor about a year ago, to this piece in position. For this third section of wall, we clamped a board between the utility wall of the bathroom and the curved wall to make sure it goes straight. Then we made a template with cardboard just as before and traced it onto the plywood.
That should be our floor line.
Yep.
We cut it to length with the circular saw, then ripped it down the length, which actually forms one side of the doorway to the bathroom. Then with the jigsaw, we cut the notches to accommodate the frames in the ceiling and fit the wall in place.
This is kind of fun to have me actually a little nook here now. Feel it, it's so spacious.
I'm not cramped at all.
Yeah.
And I saw the original toilet area.
For this last segment of the bathroom walls, which actually forms the left side of the doorway, we decided to embed this in the 2x4 of the utility wall. And to make that notch or rabbet in the side of the 2x4, I thought it'd be easiest to use a router. And that's why we're attaching this piece of wood along the 2x4 to guide the router to cut to the right width. And here I'm setting the depth of the router, which is the same thickness as the plywood, or 3/4 of an inch. And right about here, I'm realizing this is a lot of material to try and remove with the router. And then this happened.
So you can see here how the router just went too far in because I was pushing so hard against it, and it just slipped and went deeper.
So we gave up on the router and used a circular saw instead. This worked really well, and I just used a hammer and a chisel to help clean up the corners, which of course the circular blade can't fit into. So here are the results, and a preview of what the wall will look like fitting into it. We skipped using a template on this segment because it was a pretty simple wall, and we used a circular saw to cut it to height and to width. Here I'm cutting a really big notch out of the top of this wall segment because we have to accommodate the AC vent that is in the ceiling right along this wall. Back in the trailer, we get it to fit really well after a slight adjustment.
It's fitting in that rabbet pretty well.
And see that the width of this doorway, which is about 22 inches, seems plenty big. Here you can see more clearly why we had to cut out that notch to accommodate for the AC unit.
There we go.
Even with this quarter round trim on the edge of each wall, there's still plenty of room to get through the door. Now we're going to secure this first wall segment into the trailer. And to do that, we have these 1/2-inch pieces of plywood in which we're drilling through holes and countersinking them. And we had cut these pieces to fit on the frame of the trailer shell, exactly where we would put this rigid insulating foam. With those locations in mind, we secured these small pieces of plywood with a bunch of number 8 screws. And thanks to those countersunk holes, the heads of the screws were well below the surface of the plywood. So we put that wall panel back in position, and then unfortunately see that we didn't quite make those 1/2-inch pieces of plywood wide enough to screw into these little wooden blocks, so we'll fix that quickly with some wider pieces of plywood. So here we are swapping out 2 segments of this plywood with wider pieces, and the original ones will still work for connecting the interior walls. Now you can see that that plywood overlaps with this block really well, so screwing it in should be no problem. But first we have to attach this block to the frame by drilling 2 holes slightly bigger than the pop rivet we're using. Then we secure that block with 2 pop rivets put in place with this pneumatic riveter, which makes it so much easier. And here you can see we've put in a block down low as well. Now we're making sure that the wall is plumb or straight up and down. And once it is, we use a piece of chalk to mark where it lines up on the floor. So now we know where the screws through the subfloor can go. But before we drill, we check under the trailer and we see that we might be hitting this part of the chassis. So we drill our first hole cautiously, and as a bit goes in, I can feel it nicks the side of that joist. But since it did miss, I drilled 2 more holes. And down below, you can see just how close they were to that part of the chassis. Then we put the wall back in position and secured it from below with 3 screws. At the top of the wall, we secured it with screws going through small pieces of plywood that essentially acted as wooden washers. We also tried to avoid having the steel screws go through the aluminum of the frame, which if you didn't see my other videos, can make aluminum crumble away like this. Finally, we secured the sides of the wall with 1 screw into each of those blocks we secured to the frame. Now we're going to connect the 2 wall segments with dowel pins. I'm marking the location of one every 6 inches, putting the walls together, and then very carefully transferring those marks over because they have to be really accurate in order to make those dowel pins line up. Using a combination square, I then transfer the marks from the front of the wall to its edge. And here we have a dowel jig set up to drill about half the depth of the dowel. Then, as accurately as possible, I'm lining it up with that mark on the edge of the plywood and clamping it on. And thanks to that little ring on the drill bit, which is called a drill stop, it's easy to drill to the perfect depth. So because this isn't drilling into the center of this, here you can see that none of these holes line up with the center of the plywood. It's really important to flip this around like this, and not like this, or else the walls won't line up. So straight across. Then line it up and drill it just as before, and then repeat for every other mark you've made. For a test fit, we're going to pound a few of these in with a mallet, and make sure that it's all lining up.
Ooh, look at that.
So we've cut 2 boards here to the same length, which is 36 and 1/16 of an inch, to have this line up so we can make sure that the bathroom is square. And that way we know exactly where this wall needs to end up. So then we can trace a chalk line on either side and know where to put the screws. To really firmly pull these wall pieces together and hold them while the glue sets, we're using a little template to drill a pair of holes on either side of the joint, large enough for a screw to pass through. Then we secure a small piece of 2x4 on both sides of each wall using those screw holes we've made. And make sure those pieces of 2x4 aren't right on the joint, because otherwise you won't be able to squeeze the walls together. This allows us to put a clamp across the blocks and eliminate the gap between the walls. And with 3 sets of these blocks along the joint, we can pull the walls together evenly. With the blocks ready, we start the gluing process by gluing in each dowel, which is a lot quicker and easier with 2 people. Then we spread glue down each edge and try and put some into each empty dowel hole.
Oh crap.
What?
We didn't drill holes for the bottom.
At this point I realized I forgot to drill any holes into the subfloor before we moved the wall into position, so I quickly drill about half a dozen holes. Then we make a final pass to ensure that there's plenty of glue and start fitting the walls together. It actually takes a lot of force to push these walls together with so many dowels, so the clamps really help drive those last few millimeters. Alright, so this side is all clamped up, and this side has more of a gap, but I don't think we'll be able to help that, because when we clamp this too hard, it pulls the wall out. I didn't get a shot of it, but I went below and put in some screws, and these were the screws I used. And we squeezed some extra glue into this crack, because it is a bit wider on this side, which isn't a big deal, because we could always fill it in with Bondo later. And now we'll leave it to dry.
Let me practice first.
You got it.
The next day we undid all the clamps
All right.
and unscrewed all the blocks.
There you go. Now you should just be able to pull that out.
And of course it's easier if someone can hold it from the back.
There you go.
While the glue between those other 2 walls was setting, we got to work on the last wall segment. And just as before, we're using these pieces of wood to make sure that our walls are lining up just right. As usual, we trace the wall with chalk, drill some holes through the subfloor, and install some screws from below. Finally, we drill some countersink holes along that 2x4 stud wall and secure the plywood with some number 8 by 1 1/4 inch screws. And it was pretty exciting seeing the bathroom take shape, so we put up the medicine cabinet and the sink just to have a little preview. The next day, the glue for the curved wall had dried, so we could work on this 3rd segment of wall that connects right to it.
So that's looking pretty good, but if we measure, we can see that it's only about 20.5 down below, but 20 7/8 up above. We need to cut a wedge out of this piece to make it parallel with that side of the door. So we have this ready to cut a very thin wedge off of this wall. So now with the wall cut, that's 20 15/16, and that's about 20 15/16.
And just as we did before, we measure out the location of each dowel pin, use the jig to drill out the holes, and then glued in each dowel pin.
Left-handed.
And of course, don't forget to drill the holes through the subfloor. During our test fit, we encountered a couple challenges.
So we don't have quite enough clearance here, so we're gonna have to make this notch up here just a little bit wider so we can wiggle this in and fit it on the dowels. So now with this cut a bit wider, we have a bit of room to maneuver here with the dowels.
And the next was that we simply couldn't squeeze these walls together by hand.
I think we got really lucky with that first one. So we can get some of these at the bottom to start, but as we get up higher, I think they're just out of alignment a little bit.
So to bring some force to bear in bringing these walls together, we used our trick with the 2x4 blocks and mounted 3 pairs of them along the joint. And you do have to be mindful to try and tighten these all at the same time, because if you just tighten one, the other clamps might get loose and fall down.
Let's try squeezing both of these at the same time. One squeeze. Ready?
Both?
Yeah, at the same time.
1, 2,
2, 3. Okay, that moved it.
Yep.
So, and be careful the clamp above doesn't fall on your head if it gets loose. Okay, let's try squeezing again. Ready? 1, 2, 3.
Once we finally got the dry fit to work, we pulled the wall back apart,
There we go. All right.
applied some glue, and squeezed it back together.
All right, this is gluing up now. We'll leave this clamped for probably a day. Mom's wiping away the excess glue. We got these 3 clamps in here. Okay, Mom is securing this up here with her feet so that I can go down below and secure that with screws.
And a day later, we removed the clamps and the blocks.
That's looking pretty good.
Here we are drilling some pilot holes in some pieces of plywood that we'll use to secure the top of this wall to the ceiling of the trailer. And this long one fits perfectly between the frames, and then has a smaller piece of plywood screwed to either end to help secure it to the frames.
So this one we have to switch to the backside because we can't access the backside here because of the AC unit.
Now we place another piece of small plywood on the opposite side of the frame of the bracket we just built and secure it with 2 screws to that very same bracket. And of course, we do that on both sides. Finally, we drill some through holes through the top of this wall and secure it to our bracket with a few screws. Then we repeated this process for the other wall segment while my mom held a piece of plywood up against the walls so we could make sure to secure it in proper alignment with the other wall.
So that's how we got these walls up.
As you can see, we made some other progress since then, which I'll show you in upcoming videos. So if you want to see those, please make sure to hit that subscribe button down there. And in the meantime, you might like this video here.